The first thing Perturabo ever did as a Primarch of the Iron Warriors was count his own men, and kill 1 in 10 of them. Not enemies, not traitors, not men who had broken oaths, his sons. Selected like a lottery, beaten to death by the brothers' hands. And when he was done, Perturabo looked at what remained of his legion, men who had just watched their brothers die on his order, and then he said, "Now we begin. This is not a story about chaos corruption. This is the story of the Emperor breaking the one man who was right about everything. So let's stick to the end and make sure to subscribe." Before we talk about the fall, you need to understand what the Iron Warriors were built to be. Because this is not a story about weakness, not about men who couldn't resist temptation, not about corruption finding a crack. This is a story about a system that ate its most loyal servants alive. The 4th Legion had a Primarch. His name was Perturabo. And right now I need you to understand something about this man. Perturabo was not a berserker like Angron. He was not a politician like Gilliman. He was not a dreamer like Sanguinius. Perturabo was a genius. Born on Olympia, he appeared in a rural mountain pass with no memory of anything else. No past, no origin, just raw, overwhelming intellect dropped into a world that happened to be built entirely around the one thing he understood very well: war behind walls. The gods who found him brought him to Locos, a city-state ruled by a man named Damekos, the tyrant of Locos. And Damekos saw immediately what everyone saw seeing Perturabo. This was no ordinary child. His mind stretched from architecture to political theory to combat to engineering. He could study a siege machine he had never seen and replicate its principles from memory. He could look at a fortification and find its weakness in seconds. Damekos used him to dominate rivals, secure alliances, build defenses that made Locos untouchable on a world where untouchable lasted maybe a generation. But Perturabo gave him nothing in return. No affection, no loyalty, no warmth. He had one exception: Caliphone, the youngest daughter of Damekos, his foster sister. The only person on Olympia who truly ever got through him, who ever made him feel something other than a cold calculation. When the Emperor arrived and found his lost son, Perturabo submitted immediately, leaving Damekos the man who raised him without sentiment and without hesitation. Because finally, there was a purpose worthy of his mind. He was given the 4th Legion. He reviewed their war record. He found them arrogant, complacent, men who had grown proud on victories they had not truly earned. His response was immediate. By lottery, 1 in every 10 legionaries was chosen, and those men were executed by their brothers. Decimation, Roman in origin, brutal in application, on the first day. And this is the kind of man Perturabo was. He held everyone, including himself, to a standard that was nearly impossible. He had zero interest in sentiment standing between him and their standard. Then he went to war. Imagine this. You are the finest siege mind in the history of the human warfare. You can crack any wall, breach any fortress, design any defense. And for 30 years, that is all you are asked to do. No conquering glory, no stand beside the emperor and be called great, no receive words as gifts for your sons. Siege. The Iron Warriors became the Emperor's siege corps. The legion you called when nothing else worked, and when the walls were too thick, when the defenses were too layered, when the other legions had already tried and the body count was already catastrophic. Send for the Iron Warriors. And the Iron Warriors came. They stormed fortress city they held for centuries. They absorbed casualties that would have shattered lesser forces. And then no celebrations, no gift rewards, no personal commendation from the Emperor. Just go to the next war. And if that wasn't insult enough, Perturabo watched his numbers bleed into outposts scattered across the galaxy, while the other legion kept their full strength together for campaigns that would earn them names in the histories. He resented it, deeply, silently, and perfectly. Because he watched Rogol Dawn, Primarch of the Imperial Feast, stand at the Emperor's right hand and be called the Master of Siege. Dawn, who had never faced what Perturabo men face daily. Dawn, who received celebration for defending a palace while the Iron Warriors cracked them continent-spanning fortification and were handing the coordinates of their next target before the smoke cleared. And then came the campaign against the Hard, foul tunneling creatures with a horrific biological ability. Their mere presence distorted time around them. Iron warriors fighting near hard-aged, withered. Some died of centuries of accelerated decay while still mid-combat. Perturabo saw this campaign as strategically pointless, a meat grinder with nothing to gain. A waste of his legion lies in a region that served no meaningful military purpose, but the War Council had ordered it, and so he went. At the campaign's climax, a hard temporal shockwave devastated his fleet. He watched the ships and the warriors aboard them crumble into accelerated decay around him, zones that he could not replace, and he blamed the Emperor. Not chaos, not fate, not bad luck. The Emperor's vanity for sending the 4th Legion to a pointless war. By the time the campaign ended, something in Perturabo was very close to breaking, and then the report arrived from Olympia. The report was routine, as reports go. Olympia, the world that had shaped him, the world that his formative years, the world that he had left to serve the Emperor, had rebelled against imperial rule. For a general of Perturabo's ability, pacification should have been controlled, surgical, but it wasn't. Perturabo issued an ultimatum: enact your own decimation. 1 in 10 citizens killed by their own people as punishment, or face total extermination. Many city-states refused, and so, fortress by fortress Perturabo himself had built, the Iron Warriors came, and they did not stop. By the time the massacre was over, 5 million Olympians were dead, men, women, children, the rest enslaved. As Perturabo stormed the palace of Locos, the city-states where he had been raised, he found Caliphone, his foster sister, the only person on Olympia who had ever truly mattered to him. She confronted him. She saw what he had become, what he had done to the world and the people he had grown up among. And then, he killed her. When it was over, Perturabo stood humming to the burning pyres and looked at the ruins of his homeworld in silence. And his own warriors, the Iron Warriors, hardened veterans of the most brutal siege campaigns in human history, looked at each other and felt something they never had felt: horror. Perturabo knew that the Emperor would never forgive what had happened to Olympia. Horus watched him from the shadows. He understood perfectly. When Horus raised his banner, the Iron Warriors followed, not with a screaming devotion to the dark gods, but with cold, calculated logic. Because Horus offered the Emperor never did. Recognition. The Iron Warriors were at Ishran 5, the Dropside Massacre, when 3 entire loyalist legions descended through the atmosphere believing they were reinforcing their brother, and found instead that the guns at those brothers had already turned. The Iron Warriors sealed the trap, and then came the moment Perturabo had built for since the day he first looked at the wall and understood instantly how to destroy it: the Siege of Terra, the greatest military operation in human history. Horus and his traitor's forces, 10,000s of Astartes, millions of mortal soldiers, titans, and demon engines, descended on the throne world itself. And who did Horus task with planning the siege? Perturabo, the man who had spent 30 years being handed the impossible job and watching others receive the credit. And for the first time in his existence, Perturabo was the Primarch that mattered. And even then, even in his greatest hour, it wasn't enough. Horus was slain by the Emperor in a single combat aboard his flagship. The heresy collapsed. The traitors fled into the Eye of Terror. But Perturabo was not finished. He had one masterpiece left. 10 years after the heresy ended, the Emperor is entombed on his golden throne. The Imperium is fracturing on every seam, and Rogol Dorn is drowning. Terra almost fell. Half his Primarch brothers betrayed everything. The heresy happened on his watch, and every day he carries that weight, and is destroying him from the inside. Perturabo understood exactly how that felt, and so he built him a gift. On the world of Sebastus IV, deep within the Eye of Terror, Perturabo constructed what the history would remember as the Iron Cage. Not a fortress, not a defensive position, a trap. A labyrinth designed by the greatest siege mind of the Imperium had never produced, built specifically to be impossible to hold, impossible to retreat from, and impossible to survive without patience that no warrior consumed by guilt and pride could maintain. Every wall that fell revealed a new killing ground. Every breach drew you deep into a maze that had already decided you were not leaving. And then Perturabo sent word to Dawn, "Come," and Dawn came. Because a Primarch cannot refuse a direct challenge, because honor demanded, because guilt, the guilt of a man who believed Terra's survival had come to a too high price, demanded. The Imperial Fist marched into Sebastius Fort at full strength, and the Iron Warriors led them. And then the grinding began. Not a frontal assault, not a heroic last stand, just relentless, cold, perfect attrition. Iron warriors appearing from concealed position, hammering the Imperial Fist with overwhelming fire, and then vanishing before they could be pinned and fought. No sleep, no resupply. Just the slow, methodical destruction of an entire chapter's fighting strength. And by the time Robute Gilliam personally dispatched an Ultramarine rescue force to extract what remained of the Dawn's warriors, 400 battle brothers were gone. 400, irreplaceable Astartes veterans of the heresy, men who had survived the death of the half of Primarch, consumed by a library built by one man called Genius. It remains one of the most humiliating defeats in the history of a loyalist space marine. And, as the last Imperial Fist was dragged from the ruins of Sebastius IV, Perturabo ascended. The act of engineering that trap had pleased the Dark Powers enough. Perturabo became a demon Primarch, the Lord of Iron, transformed, permanent, and now beyond the reach of anything the Imperial could send against him. That was 10,000 years ago. The Iron Warriors never stopped building. Deep in the Eye of Terror, Perturabo claimed a demon world, and it transformed into an endless labor that reflects the mind of a genius who now has eternity to plan and nothing left to lose. Grand companies of Iron Warriors, led by warlords called Warsmiths, poured from the Eye of Terror and raids across the Imperium. And they serve chaos, but do not mistake that for devotion. The Iron Warriors use the Dark Powers the way the Emperor once used them, as a tool, as a resource, and they take what they need. Obliterators whose flesh has fused with living metals, defilers that combine demonic rage with the firepower of a battle tank, and they march. Perturabo planned for 10,000 years. The rest of the galaxy is finally catching up. So let me ask you one thing. Was Perturabo wrong? He was given the most brutal assignment in the Great Crusade, suffered the highest casualties, received the least recognition, watched Rogol Dorn be celebrated for defending what Perturabo's men died cracking it open. He fought a campaign he knew was pointless and watched his sons age to dust. And when Olympia burned, and Caliphonate died, and the last bridge to loyalty was gone, he built the most perfectly calculated act of vengeance in the history of the Imperium. And then he transcended. The Iron Warriors didn't fall to chaos, they chose it. And in the grim dark of the far future, where the Emperor sits rotting on a golden throne while his Imperium bleeds from 10,000 wounds, the logic is terrifyingly hard to argue with. So let me know in the comments if Perturabo was justified or the Iron Warriors are traitors who choose wrong. Until then, thank you for watching Iron Within, Iron Without, and I'll see you in the next one.